Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second part of our three-part series on grant writing for success. In part one, called Good Grant Writing is Good Storytelling, we reviewed key recommendations concerning writing styles, good, clear, concise writings, what reviewers look for in a grant application, always reading it from the point of view of the reviewer and hence writing it from their point of view. Um, a reviewer will judge a book by its cover, so how you express yourself, how you fulfill the key components of the grant application. We covered that in part one, including that you should have boilerplate information readily on hand, which generally applies to the cover page of the application, contact info, mission statement, board of directors, and all of that, as well as a team approach. So that was part one, and I hope that you viewed that because we're moving now into part two, which is how to complete the Arts Council's grant applications, which really, its applications contain components that all applications have. So most funding agencies have a consistent sequence of questions that they want you to respond to. Most of them follow what's been called the Common Grant Application Outline. And so what we'll do in this section is we'll use the Arts Council's three grant programs, the Community Arts Grants, which have a rolling submission dates. And we'll use those questions along with the Arts and Culture Impact Grants, which are due in spring, generally in May, and fall, generally in October. Those are two grant cycles. And each of those two grants have an budget requirement of a maximum of $5,000 for your request. And then there's the Arts Council's unique local emerging arts program, artist program, which is a once-a-year funding with a maximum request of $2,500. Short, the LEAP grant application has very short, mostly sentence or word requirements, except for describing yourself as an emerging artist in 1,500 characters or less. And that's where you should really pay attention to part one about writing clear, express your ideas in exciting ways, capture the imagination of the reviewer about yourself. Okay, so let's look at the key components that most grant applications require. Now, this first question that most of applications require, but the Arts Council does not, is called the background and history of your organization. This is generally what the reviewer will read first as your narrative. Most narratives are limited to character limits. Sometimes the funding agency will say no longer than 2 or 3 pages. So you have to be really concise. And you want to be enthusiastic, and you want to explain your organization and how you've been responsive to your community. So you don't begin with a sentence that says, our organization was founded in 2000, and with 2 decades of experience, we've worked very hard in our community. Well, so what? That doesn't tell me very much, and it's not a very exciting first sentence. So how about something along the lines of, and here's my imaginative opening, with over 2 decades of experience in X city or X neighborhood or your community, with over 2 decades of experience in our city, our arts and cultural organization has offered over 1,000 classes, hundreds of special events such as concerts, theatrical performances, dance recitals, gallery shows, talks, and after-school activities that have engaged our community to explore and appreciate all forms of the arts and how these benefit our children and our families. That's pretty dense and exciting, and it tells you, the reviewer, you're involved in a number of ways. And then continue. You might go into a little bit more detail about your community, or you might go into the seg of what issues you're facing, which would relate to part two. But in that background and history, you want to give the reviewer a sense of your experience and your commitment and the kinds of activities that your staff and board foster. Okay. Then you come to a part of the grant application that generally says, explain the need for your project. And in that need, you're going to say, what's the issue your community or your organization is facing? In the Arts Council's application, in both the community impact application, arts and culture applications, they're asking you to describe your project or program and your goals. Now, in many applications, goals are a completely separate part. The Arts Council, in condensing its grant application, says, describe your program and your goals. Well, you would describe the need in that program and goals description. Why are you suggesting doing this project? What is the challenge your organization and community face? Why do you need the funds? And after you describe that need or challenge, what are your goals to fulfilling or eliminating that need or challenge? So, for example, I always write a brief description of what the need is. And in this scenario, I'm going to use an example that we started in part one about a local arts and cultural organization creating a mural on a library, the town's or community's library. And I have very specific reasons for that, which will become clear as we go through this review, this encouragement for you to write good grants. So the reason that there's a need for the library's mural is because the building could use a sprucing up. And creating a community mural also relates, for example, to arts as healing. It can show how your community is involving members, and through the use of visual arts, it could be dance, it could be theater, people are gaining a deeper sense of themselves, and they may be healing from some trauma, or in the case of children, from some bullying, or we may just be trying to initiate, inspire the holistic approach to education, where the arts come in and they provide a well-rounded individual. Another reason is that by using the library as an example, we're also going to look at, in part three, other sources of funding. So now we have an arts activity coupled with a community building or support for libraries, which can be a whole major funding area in another foundation's programs and priorities. So you want to think very creatively about the project that you're requesting funding for. Again, good writing is very important, and responding to that need will create, as I said, the goals. And we always want to have at least two goals. And goals are always active verbs: to support, to assist, to encourage, to complete. You want to make it an active verb. So I wrote, and I have to tell you, when I write, I'm constantly editing myself. So I began the goal with to create an intergenerational community of committed participants to design and paint a mural. And then I went back and said, oh, it's not just intergenerational, it's also multicultural. I want different ages of the community involved. Maybe I'm going to involve and an objective to involve the seniors at our local senior center. So my goal one is to create an intergenerational and multicultural community of committed participants who will design and paint a mural on our city's library. Very nice. Okay. Outcome. What are the outcomes of the goal? We will recruit 20 children, youth, and adults who commit to participate in this project. Okay, now I can further explain that objective. We will recruit 20 children. I will recruit children from an after-school program in our community or from our own organizational after-school or dance or theater or visual arts program. Or I'll go and work with one particular local elementary school or high school. I will, in order to get seniors or multi-generational, go to a local senior center or a local independent living facility to bring youth and seniors together. So think creatively. The more that you create partnerships and collaboration in a grant proposal, the better it is. The better the reviewer sees how your organization is involved in the community, how responsive you are in the community, and how the community supports your organization by creating these partnerships. And by the way, mentioning partnerships or collaboration in the background and history of your organization is also a good area. You can just write it in a sentence or two. We have collaborated with dozens of organizations in our community, including the schools, the board, the public officials, the library, the after-school center, our workforce investment board, whatever it is that reflects on what your proposal is about and what reflects well on your organization. Okay, so we just did goal one. Now goal two. Okay, so you want to create this multi-generational and intergenerational and multicultural group. And then you want to, goal two, to create 2 or 3 mural designs that have been vetted by participants in our community project and in our organization. Oh, well, that's interesting. You're going to have, in these 20 participants, maybe an outcome is divide the group of 20 into 2 or 3 groups, each of which will be encouraged to create a design. Wow, that's really fantastic. And another outcome is that the groups themselves will look at their 2 or 3 designs and they may combine those elements. Another outcome is we will either select one design or combine the 3 designs into one total design. And then I created a third goal. Goal 3, to paint the mural and celebrate its vibrant addition to the library building. Outcome 1, you will have vetted this design with the community, and the community has given input, and now you're ready to paint it. And you will have gathered all of the supplies. And outcome 1 is you begin the process of painting. Outcome 2 is midway through the project, you assess and evaluate your timeline, the use of colors, the progress. And then outcome 3, you have received donations of food and drink and marketing, etc., in the community, and you host a community celebration. So that's a description for the Arts Council in 3,000 characters or less. How many characters did the Arts Council say? 1,500. And you'll have to edit, 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 which is what I constantly do. I find one word to express 3. Or I look at a sentence that's redundant and I condense that. We went through a lot of that in part 1. Another part of your application is in the grants application for the Arts Councils. It says describe your program or project leader and your teaching artist in 1,500 words. So this is a very important and a part of your grant application that you should never lose points on. It's a part of the application that is required in both public and private grant applications. And in this scenario, you want to, in a few sentences, describe Who are the key leads in your project? Give us 2 or 3 sentences, what their background and experience is, and most significantly, most importantly, the role and responsibilities they will have in this project. So I wrote one for this library visual arts project. Maria Ramirez has 20 years teaching visual arts to all ages at our local community center. Her work has been exhibited at various galleries in our states and nationally, and she received the city's Artistic Award for a mural she designed and painted at our local elementary school. Maria will serve as project director responsible for project supervision, communications, oversight, and fulfillment. She will also monitor the budget, oversee the evaluation, and complete all required reports. Second person could be the project manager. And that project manager could be an administrative assistant in your organization, or it could be your own arts educator who's going to work with the muralist, the visual teaching artist. So you would explain what that person does, how he or she will fulfill the requirements for this project and work in tandem, hand in hand with the visual artist who will work on the design of the mural. By the way, both of those positions relate to the budget, which we'll talk about when we get to that area. Then there is the community impact. Sometimes before the community impact, they say describe the demographics or the constituents that you will serve. And we went through that in part 1 about demographics and using census data and writing about the community. So I won't repeat that here, but be sure that you create a synopsis of who are the members of the larger community and who are the members of the specific constituents that your organization serves. And if it's a collaborative project, you can also write about who that organization serves. So for example, your arts and cultural organization may serve 500 active members in the community that you're involving in classes and events, but your library serves the larger community, and that's over 30,000 residents or 2,000 residents or 5,000 residents, and for sure they have a definition, a description of who their community is for their own grant applications. So here you just have community impact for the Arts Council's grant application, and in that I would also include a brief snapshot of the community members and how this grant application, how this project will have an impact on both the individuals. You can talk about collaboration. You could talk about teamwork. You can talk about cooperation. You can talk about building self-esteem. You can discuss the arts as healing. You can discuss the impact that will have visually when people drive down that street, how that mural will be front and foremost. You can discuss how the mural will invite people. It will serve to invite people into the library, and how the library not only provides books and magazines, but it has programs for preschoolers, digital literacy programs, after-school programs, homework help programs, because after all, libraries are a community center, and they provide all sorts of functions now in our communities. Then you come to a part of a grant application that the Arts Council doesn't require, but it's a crucial part of many grant applications, and that's your project management, which shows who is going to manage this project, the timeframes they're managing it in, the responsibilities they'll fulfill, and how you will assess or evaluate that. Project management really shows the funding agency your capabilities to manage and fulfill the project's own goals, as well as the funding agency's requirements, as well as the final report that you will have to write for the funding agency before you can ever apply again for another grant application. And the Arts Council does require a final report. So that goes into another key component called evaluation, which sometimes in large grant applications, when I say large, I mean those funded at 25,000, 50,000, a few $100,000, the evaluation component, which is part of the final report for your Arts Council. They don't ask you for an evaluation, but in your final report, you have to show that you've been evaluating your project. And you can do evaluations very easily. You can do a pre and a post evaluation. For example, in the visual mural, you can have a little pre-application evaluation, excuse me. You should definitely collect demographics. Who is participating in those 20 people that you're aggregated for this mural? Who are they? So we want to know their name, their address, their age, their experience. It's anonymous information. You have to explain to your participants, you're going to use this information as an aggregate, not individually. You want to know their racial or their ethnic backgrounds. People are reluctant. However, you have to encourage them to list that because it's important in grant writing to have that statistic. 56%, 60% of our participants, our clients, our constituents are low income, or 60% of them belong to a minority group, African American, Latinx, Asian American, Native American, etc. So you need that basic demographic information. Also in your evaluation, you can do online surveys. Google has a nice way of presenting that information in pie charts and graphs. You can also have long format sentence responses in which you read what people have written and then you combine that, you make that concise. You can do individual or small group interviews and or focus groups. But what you want to show in the evaluation is that, yes, you are assessing the impact of your project so that you can demonstrate to this funder how you've met their requirements successfully and how you've fulfilled it. But most importantly, you can also use that evaluation component for another grant request by showing how you've been successful and how you want to continue that project or do something similar, or how you're successful at meeting and fulfilling project goals and priorities. Data collection is really important, so don't overlook that. Now we come to where we've received the most questions in these program application, where the Arts Council asked you for questions about what you'd like answered, and the most questions we received related to the budget. So let's look at what budgets require. And we have some of the local foundations actually create a template. And these budgets always begin with your income section and your expense section. I also said in part one that doing the budget should be part of your team approach. And I would actually assign someone to do the first draft of the budget, because doing a budget requires a lot of thought, and it's always getting revised until your final submission, and it should be done on an Excel spreadsheet. And you have the income and the income sources. What usually your request is. So your income source is the Arts Council, and most people are requesting $5,000. Next column, other proposals or other funding sources. Where are you getting the rest of the funding from? Let's just say, for argument's sake, that you're requesting $5,000 and the project budget is really $10,000, double. Well, did you submit other grant applications to other funding agencies? You might have, and you might have received $1,000, or you might be requesting another $2,500. That's where you list that. Part 3 says committed funds. Well, in that section, that could mean your own budget or your own donors. And so in that $5,000, let's say you're getting 1,000, I did actually do it, $1,000 from a local Rotary Club. That's a committed fund that gave you $1,000. $1,000 or $20,000 from another grant application, Yellow Brick Road, Monterey Peninsula Volunteer Services, some other Siembras Latinas Fund. North County has, through the Community Foundation, a North County Fund. You've gone for other sources. It's very important for a funding agency to see that you're not so dependent just on it for supporting this project. So we've got 5,000 from the Arts Council, 1,000 from the Rotary Club, 1,000 from another funding agency, 2,000 from your own annual budget. That's committed funds. Now, that 2,000 can be $1,000 in cash and $1,000 in kind. What do I mean by in kind from your own agency's committed funds? Let's take your project assistant, the project manager, your arts education director. She's going, you're requesting $1,000 from the Arts Council in that 5,000, but you're also going to provide $500 cash in that salary request and $500 in kind. That you're going to provide $500 1 week's salary, and then you're going to provide the second week's salary. You're going to provide cash. You're going to provide $500 of it in kind, meaning you're not, well, that's not a really good example. You're going to provide $500 in the budget towards supplies. I'm going to revise that. You see how your thinking changes. You're going to provide $1,000 cash of her salary in committed funds, and you're going to provide $500 in supplies in kind towards the project. Because you have the supplies on hand and you have paints available. And then we have another $1,000 that could be a cash or in kind from community agencies. So for example, you could have $500 cash committed from a local hardware store, or a paint supply store may be giving you more paint and brushes and pans and drop cloths, and a local restaurant or bakery may be providing the foods for the community celebration. So again, you have your expenses of the request to the foundation, the funding agencies. You have other funding sources committed from funding agencies or Rotary clubs or stores or community partners. And then you have your own committed funds, which can be cash and or in kind. And by the way, other sources of funding can be cash or in kind. Then you have your expenses. Nearly every template on a budget says salaries, benefits. So you list your salaries, the visual artist as a consultant salary, or it could be somebody on your staff salary. You list the salary, what you're requesting from the Arts Council, and what you're going to add from your committed partners or from your own annual budget. So you follow those columns. And then another is the benefits. There's usually 12% for workperson's compensation, the taxes, etc. It's usually coming in at 12%. So you have salaries, and then the benefits, and that's a subtotal, salaries and benefits. Then there are usually line items like materials and supplies, or marketing and community outreach. and or travel, and or publications and postage, and or rent and utilities, and or indirect. Many foundations will allow you to put a small percentage, generally 10% or less, into what they call indirect. Some funding agencies do not allow indirect. They're in small grant applications like $5,000, there's no indirect. In large applications like 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, they do allow indirect. You have to find out about that from your funding agency. Now, working on this budget also means you have to have a budget narrative. So for every single line item, you have to have a narrative. Now, I actually write the narrative on the budget template because I like to make it easy for the reviewers. So when I'm writing salary, and I'm saying we're requesting 2,000 from the Arts Council, and we're going to get 1,000 from the Rotary Club for the salary, and we're committing $500 in kind towards that salary, I will write that out. I will say request for 2,500 from the Arts Council, $1,000 from our local Rotary, and we are applying that towards the salary. $500 in kind commitment from our organization for 1 week for the arts educator's salary. I explain it right there in concise, brief language so the reviewer sees every single one. Let's say in your marketing, you're requesting the total budget is 500, and from the Arts Council, you're asking for 2,500. And from another agency, you got $100. And then from your own budget, you're going to commit 200. So you have the 500, and the marketing includes the posters, recruiting people into your multi-generational and intergenerational creation of your community of visual artists to paint the mural. You describe that. You're going to do posters, brochures. You're going to put an ad in the local newspaper. You're going to create a PSA, whatever it is, you describe it in your budget narrative. Again, brief, concise language. Okay, so now it says, I'm going to read the questions and finish that. The budget portion is sometimes a challenge as the information required from one grantor to another is different. And the budget doesn't always align with what the grantor is looking for. Sorry, your budget must align. You create with what the grantor is looking for, and you write that in the budget narrative, and you create a budget that's very specific for each funding agency. And if your project is a $25,000 project and you're looking for $5,000 from the Arts Council, and you're requesting 20,000 from another funding source, you write that in your grant application budget. Other sources of funding. You write requests for $5,000 from the Arts Council pending, or request is secured. So yes, every budget is unique. Question number 2, budgets are not always easy because many of our programs have overlapping expenses, so it's difficult to isolate and attribute. Yes, there are overlapping budgets for a project, but this is expressed again in the income sources for your budget. And I've explained that, you getting it from different sources. So yes, you describe what your request is, other sources of funding, and what your own organization is committing. And sometimes there's a 4th column. Let's say you're doing a theatrical performance and you're charging $10 a ticket while you're deriving income. So you explain that. And then it says, question number 3, it can be challenged because the grantor wants to know exactly how each penny is being spent because of the large amount of record keeping. Yes, there is record keeping. Yes, that reflects on how well your project management skills are. And yes, your budget will reflect your ability to manage that project. You don't have to scan everything. You just have to keep track of everything. And you could do that on an Excel spreadsheet, or you can do that in a QuickBooks account. You can do that with your business manager, your accounting, or you do it yourself, but keep a running tab and keep those expenses aligned with your request expenses, your salary expenses, your travel expenses, your materials and supplies expenses, your marketing and outreach expenses, your overhead rent and utilities expenses, etc. Just keep track of that on a spreadsheet. Finally, the last two components of the Arts Councils is your board or group's approval letter. It's very boring if it just says the president of the board says, yes, I approve this project, our board supports this project. Much more engaging, much more fulfilling is if your president of your board writes, or your executive director writes a letter that explains the breadth and depth of your organization, how your board is supportive of your organization, and how this project demonstrates fulfillment of your organization's mission. So you want a one-pager, well-written, in-depth, concise explanation of why and how your board is supporting this organization and how the project that it's supporting reflects your organization's history, experience, mission, and involvement. And finally, you have the executive summary of your project. That's generally a 1 or 2 sentence. It's generally at the top, at the cover page of your application. I write that last, and that has to express in clear, concise language how your application, what it's about, how it reflects your community and your organization. This is what's going to be used on the funding agency's website. It's going to be used in its annual report, and it's going to be used as a link often to your organization to express how your organization's, how this project reflects your organization's capabilities and success. Okay, so I hope this part of our session helps you understand the depth and scope of most grant applications and excites you to write well, write with enthusiasm, write with encouragement, don't get down, but write for success. Thank you, and we'll see you in part 3, which is reuse, recycle, and reapply.